A realm so close to ours, but always out of reach. Until I found him. Frank Stone. My key. My killer.
Nothing quite scratches my horror itch like a campy 80s slasher. I mean, Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw, even American Horror Story 1984. Add on to that the fact that I'm a big Dead by Daylight gamer, plus a fan of supermassive games, and this was an entry I couldn't wait to get my hands on. Welcome to Supermassive and Behavior's brand new collaboration project, The Casting of Frank Stone. The casting of Frank Stone takes place in the world of Dead by Daylight and spans 3 different timelines while including 6, but technically 5 playable characters. More on that later. This game utilizes the butterfly effect that Until Dawn has made us all so familiar with through various different choices that cause changes in the game, as well as some QTEs to add immersion as we follow the story of a group of teenagers working to make their independent horror masterpiece, the legendary Murder Mill. Well, let's not dawdle. We don't want to get taken by the entity. Grab your flashlights and let's prepare to survive the world of the casting of Frank Stone. Quick spoiler warning here, this game has many branching paths and I think a first playthrough is best experienced blind. You've been warned. If you enjoy this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. Thank you. Let's start with the gameplay, shall we? This section will be rather brief as this is a supermassive game, which means it's basically an interactive movie. We make decisions that can set off the butterfly effect and change outcomes in the game with the ultimate goal of completing the game with everyone alive. At least that should be your goal. I don't know, some of you all could be out here slaughtering characters in your free time, but hey, whatever floats your boat. There are QTEs, and this game specifically utilizes skill checks, which if you play Dead by Daylight, you'll feel like that Leonardo DiCaprio meme where he's pointing at the TV. There are of course collectibles to find in this game that come in the form of these adorable little doll models of the Dead by Daylight original killers. Again, Leonardo DiCaprio meme here. Anyway, these provide nice tidbits of lore that help give you the full picture of the story and can make the ending a bit more predictable. But let's be honest, mysterious lady with an Eastern European accent, I've seen James Bond, I know where this is going.
I'm so very sorry for the delay in my arrival. There are a great many things that require my attention at the moment, and I would hate to have to deprive you of my full attention while we are together.
We have 6 controllable characters: Sam, Jaime, Chris, 1980 Linda, 2024 Linda, and Maddie. That's why I said technically 5 since they're both Linda, but they're not the same Linda and... Okay, you're probably getting confused. Let's end this nightmare and move on to the story discussion. Alright, so as mentioned, the stories can branch off in many different ways. I feel as though the canon story is everyone surviving, at least until the final chapter, as some chapters feel a bit empty if you lose people early. But of course, that's subjective, so I'm not saying there is a definitive story, just the most fulfilling to me is the one where everyone makes it nearly to the end. But I'll talk about significant branches throughout and let you decide. We begin our story in the year 1963 as Officer Sam Green, who is investigating the old steel mill for a missing baby. Apparently many people have gone missing in the area, with a few being found no longer alive, and Sam has a hunch this steel mill is connected. We meet with the caretaker Tom, who is a genuinely nice guy with a bit of a drinking problem. After digging for a bit, we find his dog Merlin chowing down on some good old human remains. You know, like any other guard dog ever, right?
Will you look at that? That damn dog?
After the calmest severed human ear grab I've ever seen in my life, we proceed to the storm drain and arrive at the furnace chamber because, well, officer's intuition? Look, I agree something was definitely up here, but Sam's gotta know a little more than he's letting on because he sniped this location. Anyway, it's here we encounter the man, the myth, the legend, Frank Stone, who is of course about to continue his work on a young infant. Of course we stop him, which the only thing that can be changed here is if we save the baby or not and how badly we are injured. Sam always shoots Frank Stone, but naturally, I want to save the baby. I mean, what kind of monster wouldn't? But I get it, those skill checks can be tough. We see Frank Stone's life come to an end, and we skip ahead to modern day 2024 where we control Maddie. Maddie's character opens up with some nightmares involving her recently deceased mother, and we get a jump scare right about here. Maddie serves kind of as the outsider to the group. She's less informed about the history and events of the past, but is still directly linked to the main cast. I would consider her the main character, and that she doesn't fill the other traditional horror roles as well, but would definitely serve as a strong final girl. Anyway, Maddie is feeling the pain of the loss of her mother Bonnie, and is heading on a flight to England to attend a meeting at Garrett Manor. On the drive, we can stop to pick up a hitchhiker, which, even though I feel like it's a bad idea, I've done both paths and there's no real benefit to not picking her up, so hey, what can the nice older lady do to us? Pick her up! The lady reveals her name is Linda and she is a filmmaker, to which we have some small talk before making it to Garrett Manor where we meet Stan.
Ah, ladies. Hello, welcome.
Stan is a bit of a greedy douche, but I find him one of the most entertaining characters because of his selfish tendencies. He often creates conflict for the main party in pursuit of his own best interests, and I think that spices up the game in a positive way. So Stan, I like you, buddy, even if you suck as a person. It is at this point we meet James Bond villain Augustine Lieber. She explains she's invited us all here today because we have a piece of the original film strip for the movie Murder Mill, a movie Linda made in her teenage years. Now I'm no expert, but one, if this movie is considered cursed and lost, maybe it should stay that way, because playing around with cursed is never a good idea. And don't you think the person had a good reason for doing so? I mean, you could argue, oh, they thought it sucked and wanted to dispose of it, but I think neatly being cut into 3 pieces is a telltale sign that this should probably stay gone. But hey, I guess if you had an old piece of junk film somebody was offering you a lot of money for, you wouldn't think much of it. Especially in Maddie's case, since she inherited it from her mother. But Linda, come on, I expect more from you. Augustine leaves, and now we return to 1980. Jaime, Chris, and Linda in her youth are working on making the movie Murder Mill, and I'm no film critic, but I don't think this one's getting certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes.
All I have to do is betray my own sister, and you will let me go free to fight another day. God damn you! God damn you for forcing me to make this impossible choice!
They are interrupted by Sam from the first chapter, who tells us hightail it out of here because it seems he still has some PTSD about the events that occurred here. We comply and head back to Jaime's house. Jaime is the boyfriend of Chris and has lived in Cedar Falls his whole life. Spoiler alert, he actually was confirmed to be the baby from the first chapter that could have died to Frank, but we'll get to that later. Chris is his curious girlfriend who seems to ignore every warning about the steel mill and is just eager to get the film done and make it the best she can. Ah, a true artist. She becomes even more motivated when she learns of the serial killer that had set up base at the steel mill and is blinded by the potential success the film could have. But unfortunately, our camera broke when Sam jump scared us. After getting some money from Jaime's sister Bonnie, yes, that is Maddie's mother Bonnie, we head to the drugstore to get the camera fixed. Well, the drugstore is a bust, but we do meet our friend Robert, son of Sam Green, who tells us he can get us into the steel mill through a secret passage he knows about. I like Robert a lot. He seems to be that one friend that's been excluded from the hangout and is finally getting his chance to be included, and man, I feel for you, Robert. Well, except I don't think this is something you want to be included on, but good effort, man. Well, we head across the street to the dark and creepy new store that nobody else has ever seen before, and after examining a bunch of Dead by Daylight references, we get jump scared by the creepy old shopkeeper who sells us a new camera to finish our film with. Now, that just seems like a bad idea. Well, after we leave the shop, we get a creepy villain monologue from Augustine and find out the old shopkeeper is Augustine. How does that make sense, you ask? She's younger in the future. Well, hang tight for a second. Also, if you haven't figured it out yet, Augustine is clearly the villain. I know, shocker. We explore the mansion in 2024 for a bit. Nothing major really happens. Linda and Maddie have a moment, and they revisit Maddie's nightmares that seem to be a completely forgotten plot point from here on out. Then we jump back to 1980 for a long chapter.
Hey, right on time!
Time to get cooking!
The time has come. Jaime gets a little jealous at Robert being so close to Chris, but this is an obvious bait to start conflict later, so we don't let it bother us. We infiltrate the storm drain and finally reach the steel mill, where we shoot our final scene. Afterwards, we head to the machine shop to see if we can find something of Frank Stone's, where we find this, let's just call it a Dahmer collection that you'd give an arm for. Robert understandably freaks out and goes to search for his dad, and for some reason Chris is just excited to record a bunch of body parts in jars. Yeah, not psychopathic at all, Chris. As we go to leave, Chris and Jaime are attacked by Frank Stone, in a mysterious portal where, despite our best efforts to save her, or to run away, because what am I going to do to stop this thing? Chris is sucked in the portal. Jaime can actually die here if he tries to help Chris and didn't bring the firecrackers to distract Frank with, but Chris gets pulled into the portal regardless, so honestly, don't even try. Back in 2024, our trio of Stan, Linda, and Maddie are confronted by Sam Green. If you're thinking, wow, he looks amazing to be at least 80, then hold your horses, because we're building up to that cowboy. Sam informs the crew that the film strip they each had a piece of contains an ancient evil being, and we cannot let it reunite. If you haven't figured it out yet, Frank Stone is locked in the film, so essentially if the pieces are combined, he gets released, which I mean, come on, Linda. You were there for all the events, so why would you even consider this offer? Keep the film strip far away from anybody trying to reunite it. Anyway, Sam and Stan have some bad history, and that Stan took advantage of Robert to obtain his piece of the film strip. So Stan runs off, to which Maddie follows and stumbles upon this super high-tech futuristic looking machine, also known as the Horologium. I doubt I pronounced that correctly, but look, basically it's a futuristic green glowy machine with some spinning blades and switches. Back to 1980 briefly, Linda and Bonnie have a moment where I'm not sure if there's romantic undertones and tension or what's going on. It just feels a little awkward, so I don't know if they were supposed to kiss here or if Linda likes Jaime, because that is a route we can take, or what. I'm not sure. This is just kind of messy.
She and the band pretty much moved on without me.
You deserve better than that.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, Linda is attacked by Frank Stone eventually and discovers that she can ward him off with the camera, which I believe could be considered foreshadowing that Frank is trapped in the film, since it hasn't been clearly stated yet, but hey, what do I know? Linda escapes for us, but of course it's possible for her to get hooked if she fails to ward off Frank. Well, let's head back to 2024. It's getting juicy.
But this is where the big climax happens.
Maddie hears screams from the machine and quickly shuts it off to help whoever's inside. If Maddie is too slow to shut off the machine and fails the QTE, she can actually die pretty brutally here, but we'll operate under the assumption she was successful. Remember how Chris got sucked into that green portal? Well, here she is, popping up in 2024, and is it all making sense now? That's right, we're operating in a multiverse, different timeline scenario game, so I'm going to do my best not to be confused, and we'll move forward from there. A pretty big decision that ultimately ends up not meaning too much occurs here in the form of whether Chris should return to 1980 or remain in 2024. If Chris goes back, she can die in the next chapter, but if she stays, Stan can die in just a moment if you fail a skill check. For now, let's assume she went back to 1980, and we'll discuss the other route later. Assuming you successfully send her back, because Chris can also die here if you fail, we are left with Stan and Maddie trapped in the manor for the time being. Well, while all this is going down, Sam and Linda are exploring the manor together when Sam kind of passes out, I guess? Well, not really, because he's still talking, but let's just say he's having some sort of vision. This isn't really elaborated on again, but I think it serves as convenience to give Linda the opportunity to steal his gun. Well, Sam and Linda discover a library full of films and artifacts from a bunch of different timelines, bringing us to the final full confirmation that not only does this game have time travel, but we're in a multiverse scenario. See, Augustine has been gathering all possible renditions of the film through different timelines using her special machine that's difficult to pronounce in an effort to free Frank Stone and serve her evil entity god. Dead by Daylight fans will know the entity, but if you're new around here, just know it's a bad evil god that feeds off of suffering. It's at this point Linda finally concludes that this is a Sam Green from a different timeline. Wow, Linda, you're a little behind, I think. I also don't get why she just directs her anger towards Sam like he hasn't tried to do anything but help you all out. She just thinks, creepy dark collector woman with paintings of evil cult things, or man from my past that's not as old as he should be. Well, I'll trust the creepy lady. Seriously, I know Linda feels like the Jamie Lee Curtis of this game, but damn, sometimes she really pissed me off with her rationale. Anyway, we move on to chapter 9, where we solve some short puzzles with Linda and find Frank Stone's lair, including a little Dead by Daylight stuffy and a lot of deranged diary entries. It seems Frank had been influenced to commit these atrocities and wasn't in his right mind. But seriously though, these are some of the most entertaining collectibles in the whole game, so make sure you read them. Linda makes her way through the puzzles, and we finish the chapter. Chapter 10 is where we decide if Chris should stay in 2024 or go back, which was explained earlier for clarity's sake, so moving on to Chapter 11, we are in 1980 again, where we're currently operating under the assumption that we sent Chris back to 1980. Here we see Chris rejoin Linda and the crew, Bonnie included, where we all meet up in the furnace room, where it all began. Robert is gone to get his dad and is a bit misdirected by an elder Augustine, who really just wastes his time.
Wait, how long ago was he here? Just now, or what?
It was more than a minute, less than a lifetime.
Chris explains her journey briefly, but the gang is interrupted as Linda lets us know that Frank Stone is coming. Also, if you did the smart thing and ran away as Jaime, Chris can punch him for it now, which I don't think is necessarily fair considering it's pretty easy to die if we try to help. I mean, what are we supposed to do against a supernatural being in his time-traveling portal? At this point, we return to 2024, where Maddie and Stan in our scenario explore the house a bit more, find a creepy pendant that if we take can lead to us being hypnotized, if used in conjunction with the drink Augustine gave us earlier, and proceed through the house to the filming room where we are going to watch Murder Mill. I hope you have your popcorn ready. Also notable in this area, in my opinion, is one of the most significant interactable objects in the game, a tape recording of Augustine talking to Frank Stone. It's here we are confirmed that Augustine manipulated Frank to become a deranged serial killer through her connection as his psychologist. Man, this lady really doesn't quit, huh?
Do you ever feel as though you have a higher calling? This instinct of yours to inflict pain on others, to punish them, I don't believe it is wholly errant. These sessions are all about taking responsibility, Frank. Not just for your past, but for your future, too. Yes, you have a future, and it could be boundless. You simply have to trust me.
Anyways, all hope seems lost that there's nothing we can do at this point but watch Murder Mill play, since Augustine now has all three pieces. I'm not saying I blame Linda the most, but I blame Linda the most for this. Finally, we jump to 1980 to see how the film being played to our cast concludes. Frank Stone pops up here, and in our scenario, he can kill Chris, but Jaime is also an option here if Chris remained in 2024. We save Chris in our world, and as a result, Bonnie is hooked and killed. I've tried every scenario, and no matter what route you take, Bonnie always dies here, unfortunately, confirming this is a different timeline than our 2024 timeline, since Bonnie just recently died there, only 40 years later. I know it's confusing, but we'll get into it. Anyway, modern day Linda proclaims that's not what happened, adding to the validity that we're operating under different timelines here. We cut to 1980 Sam and Robert Greene, who are here to save our teenagers and stop Frank Stone once and for all. Sam is determined. I will admit here, this part of the game frustrated me a bit. I heard they cut approximately 4 hours of content, and you really feel it here. After all that build up and going to the store and roaming the mansion, we get all of our action dumped into 2 relatively short chapters. I have no idea how Jaime and Chris ended up in the storm drain because it was never shown. But instead, the player has to assume Frank hooked Jaime and made Chris hide in a room downstairs while he pursued Linda. Jaime does mention they followed Frank down there, but that's not enough to satisfy me. Kind of frustrating to be honest, but I get that there can be budget issues. I'm hoping for a complete edition someday because I feel there's a lot of missed opportunities toward the end of the game. But I'll stop complaining. Let's continue. Sam pulls up on Frank Stone like John Wick, armed with the camera, and through a dramatic battle, finally seals Frank in the film once and for all. Well, unfortunately, we know from our 2024 timeline that it's not going to stay that way because I guess Linda forgot everything they just went through and was like, sure, I'll set him free and take the money, why not?
You got your damn movie. What more do you want?
We cut back to 2024 for our finale, and like most supermassive games, this can be an absolute bloodbath. Frank is freed from the film, and no matter what choices you make, he has to absorb somebody to become whole. In super gruesome fashion, he shoves one character in his stomach mouth to absorb into his being. The best option here is Stan, depending on how you look at it, because he dies no matter what you do, so might as well let him be the one to take the forced death so you can save more characters. Once Frank absorbs a victim, you can actually see the victim screaming out from his flesh, which is totally not unsettling at all. I mean, look at this. Yeah, not creepy whatsoever. Anyway, Maddie and Linda escape through one gate while Sam escapes through the other. In order to take the elevator, Maddie and Linda finish one last generator Dead by Daylight style, and Linda distracts Frank so Maddie can take the elevator. How heroic. It's worth noting that if Maddie is dead here, Linda automatically takes the elevator, which if you elect to go down in either scenario, leads you to a final meeting with that wretched Augustine. She's been trying to free the entity this whole time, obviously, by offering it a new champion in the form of Killer Frank Stone. Augustine has repeatedly traveled different timelines all for this moment, and we can at this point choose to give up our freedom or give her one last big middle finger and take off. If Linda comes to this meeting and has Sam's gun, she can also shoot her, which I must say is the most satisfying. Maddie can also be hypnotized here too, given very specific choices, which just feels like a waste of her character arc to me, so hopefully you didn't get that outcome. Back to Linda's chase with Frank Stone, if you hit some QTEs correctly and choose to let Sam take over the chase, Linda is not out of the woods yet because she literally heads into the woods. Some good QTE execution results in the same for Sam until all three of our characters meet at a familiar campfire with some familiar survivor faces, all while being stalked by Frank Stone. That's right, they are now victims of the entity for eternity. Augustine is of course betrayed by Frank Stone and sacrificed to the entity herself.
I humbly await my reward for loyal service, unending.
And we see some final scenes from 1980 where whoever survived that timeline decide to split the film into 3 pieces and never allow it to be reunited. Of course, either this timeline's Linda wasn't present for the splitting of the film, which begs the question of how she ended up with a piece, or she's just an absolutely incompetent fool. Okay, sorry guys, I'll lay off Linda. We get a short after credits scene of the mysterious caped woman, who if it isn't obvious yet, is revealed to be an older Augustine, continuing to gather younger Augustine to try and resurrect Frank Stone again and again. And that's the end of our game. Okay, are you left with some questions? Wondering what happened to some characters? Me too! The game felt as though it was missing some closure on a lot of things, and that's likely due to last minute cut content, which is really unfortunate. Jaime kinda goes from being a main character to being a sideshow after Chapter 5, and characters like Chris and Jaime are never elaborated on what happened after the end of the battle with Frank in 1980. It really is unfortunate, but I still really enjoyed this game for what we got out of it. I will admit my bias due to being a fan of Dead by Daylight, and trust me, there was a lot of references and fan service in this. But I will also acknowledge this game was lacking a lot and could have been so much more. It's a bit of a shame, but let's discuss some things and maybe that'll shed some light for you. First, let's quickly address what happens if Chris stays in 2024. Most things play out the same, with the characters hardly recognizing that someone has time traveled to their time, aside from Sam saying, "Oh yeah, these things could happen," which makes me question how Linda can stay so calm and still attack Sam in a time like this. The big change comes from the end of the game, where Chris can choose to either attempt to return to 1980 through the projector screen, or flee to the woods to be a victim of the entity for all eternity. If Chris is carrying the pocket mirror from Augustine way back in Chapter 3, and if Chris has the pendant that could have hypnotized Maddie, she will burn into a crisp upon going back to 1980. Otherwise, Chris will return to 1980, where we will see 2 versions of Chris in the same world before the screen cuts to black. This implies that Chris will prevent the teenagers from ever making Murder Mill in the first place, and if she can convince her alternate self, which believe me is no easy task, then maybe she can stop Frank Stone from ever being freed in the first place. This seems to honestly be the most positive ending. If Chris can somehow stop Stone from ever coming to exist again in 1980, then none of this needless death and end of the world mumbo jumbo needs to happen. Now, you've probably heard me mention at this point that the entity leaves people to a fate of endless suffering, which if you aren't familiar with Dead by Daylight lore, that probably makes no sense to you. Allow me to explain. The entity is essentially an eldritch god that derives its strength from suffering. Long story short, when the entity has a survivor in its realm, it subjects the survivor through a trial with a killer. If the survivor survives and escapes through the exit gate, they always end up back at the same campfire, awaiting the next trial where things repeat themselves. If the survivor dies in the trial, they also wake up back at the campfire after feeling all the pain and suffering, of course, to which again, they await the next trial. It is an endless cycle of trials until the survivor becomes a hollow shell of themselves, and at this point, the entity disposes of them. To me, this is a fate worse than death. No hope of escape and doomed to be killed or to escape fruitlessly over and over. It's like being in hell, essentially. Either you live with the fear of dying for a long time, or you suffer extreme pain from death over and over. No escape. Makes you feel not so bad if some of your characters didn't survive the game and make it to the campfire. Also makes you wish Chris took that projector escape. This fact really solidifies Chris returning to 1980 at the end of the game to hopefully prevent the events from occurring in the first place as the best ending to me. Now, in a rare scenario, if both Maddie and Linda are dead before they can deliver Frank to Sam for the distraction, then Sam will hop in the time travel machine and take off to an unknown time, likely to attempt to thwart Augustine in another timeline. Now, we knew Sam had time traveled in some manner before because, let's face it, Sam should be at least 80 in the 2024 timeline considering he was a grown man in 1963. Either he looks phenomenal for his age, or Sam has come from another timeline, which is all but confirmed in his conversations with Linda. This means the ending shouldn't come as a surprise, but it does raise some questions on if Sam has been using Augustine's machine all this time, if he has his own machine, or if he was sucked through a portal like Chris. One thing you can notice though is that Sam doesn't fiddle with the controls for a while. He goes up to the console and operates the confusing high-tech machine with confidence, which I believe shows he's done this before. We do find out he belongs to a secret society determined to stop the entity, so maybe they have the resources, but unfortunately, this question is up for speculation and is never clarified upon. Sam definitely fills the horror movie archetype of the strong, experienced, older character, but he mostly remains a mystery throughout the game. We know he loves his son, and we know he's devoted to stopping Frank Stone, and by extension the entity, but that's about all we know. I know I sound like a broken record, but I really hope we get that cut content someday with some clarification on Sam. A few additional details I think are worth mentioning include the fact that all three of our timelines in the game are from different, albeit similar, universes. Now, some may disagree with this, as they know if Sam gets hurt in the opening chapter, then he's hurt in 1980 in the same manner. This, however, is a red herring. We know these can't be the same timeline because the game staff has confirmed Jaime is the baby in the opening chapter. However, if the baby doesn't make it in Chapter 1, Jaime is still present in 1980, therefore confirming these are separate timelines. Another detail that I believe is noteworthy is the fact that Augustine is the old woman we see in the black cloak and tending the curiosity shop. Augustine was there when Frank had the baby, and Augustine was popping out of the time travel machine when Chris appeared. I think it can be inferred based on the post-credit scene that old Augustine is the real mastermind behind it all. When she pulls a young Augustine through with her, the Augustine seems a bit shocked, almost as if she's never time traveled before, and the older Augustine likely will be training her to continue the cycle. Think about it. Old Augustine was the one who sold us the camera to make the film in the first place, and she's the one pulling young Augustines to 2024. It seems to me that this is a cycle that Augustine wishes to keep repeating in order to free the entity in the most universes possible. Just a theory, but definitely something to consider.
Well, if we can just get one more shot of something directly connected to Frank Stone, like anything he might have left behind, we'll get all the attention in the world.
One fan theory I've seen a lot that has since been confirmed false was the idea that Chris becomes Augustine, as we hear nothing about Chris post-1980, and Augustine was a bit weird with names initially. This has been confirmed to be false, but I thought this was a cool idea and would have made for a great plot twist. Unfortunately, we are instead stuck with the reality that Chris just has no closure on her story, and Augustine is an unrelated villain. I wanted to mention this because, come on, wouldn't that have been such a cool twist? Well, anyways, I do have a few gripes with the game I've voiced already. You know I really wish the cut content was present, as I think I've already beaten that wish into the ground, but there are a few other points of contention I think are worth mentioning. For starters, I do wish the ending could have had more options. I know the whole point of Dead by Daylight is that it's pointless to try to escape, and the entity has you for eternity or whatever, but I wish there were more options to prevent being captured by the entity in the first place. Chris can of course return to her timeline through the projector, and Sam can use the time travel machine, but I wish there was an option for Linda and Maddie, aside from die or be a prisoner for eternity. I don't know, maybe I'm being whiny, but I feel as though this ending adds to the belief many people have that your choices don't really matter that much in the end. To continue from there, I felt there was a lack of significant choices in comparison to other supermassive games. When I played House of Ashes, I felt like every decision mattered a lot more, because it could lead to someone being injured or create conflict between characters that could ultimately lead to their deaths. In this game, I feel as though the character relationships mechanic is completely useless. Sure, we can see Chris and Jaime stay together, but you get the exact same choices if they break up or remain a couple when determining if they live or die. Then there's characters like Stan and Bonnie who, no matter what you do, die anyway. I mean, if you're gonna have characters like Jaime who essentially are meaningless to the plot after Chapter 5, you could have let Bonnie or Stan have the option to live, especially considering how present Stan feels throughout the game. Of course the ending is bleak, which I expect nothing less of in this world, and I think that definitely could be forgiven if many of the choices leading up to it had real consequences. Finally, my last main gripe with the game is the lack of chase sequences and the pacing. When replaying the game for every route to get the Platinum Trophy, you realize how long it takes for Frank Stone to even really appear, and all the real action is shoved into chapters 13 and 14. Sure, there's a few camera fight sequences in Chapter 7, but there's quite a lack of action throughout the majority of the game. I do appreciate the character development we were given, but when a lot of that development builds up to nothing, such as Jaime's relationship with his father or his mother's illness, then why did we spend so much time doing it? It just feels like the beginning of the game drags quite a bit, especially for second and third playthroughs, and I personally found myself dreading having to trek back through the storm drain and so forth just to get that one item I needed in Chapter 3 for a decision in Chapter 14. Of course, that is definitely partially my fault for not planning out my runs better, but from a casual blind playthrough perspective, it can definitely hamper the experience. Maybe I'm wrong, but if you disagree, please let me know in the comments. All opinions are respected and welcome here. Well, here we are, the casting of Frank Stone. I have to say, despite my previously listed criticisms, I did really enjoy this game. When my bias is put to the side, I'd consider it an average story game, but with my bias and the little joy I got at seeing all the Easter eggs, plus the possibility of the online game I enjoy so much expanding, I absolutely loved the game. It's not perfect by any means, and I definitely wouldn't put it on the same level as some of the other greats in the genre like Until Dawn or The Wolf Among Us, but man, I had a blast with this game, and I can only hope they continue attempting to expand the world of Dead by Daylight. If there's one thing you have to admit, it's that the lore of Dead by Daylight is rich, and the possibilities are endless. Good luck surviving, and make sure to avoid the entity's grasp. Until next time, survivors, thanks for watching.
Frank Stone is finally the man he was meant to be. My champion. A killer worthy of the entity. The bleed between worlds is open, split apart by sacrifice and violence. All will be swallowed by the entity's power.
If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Let me know if there's any game you're looking forward to there being a video on in the future. I appreciate the support. Thanks for watching. Until next time.